after several former, I finally have something to share with you about the new broken Warframe, Xaku. But take note that this will just focus on the Warframe itself. There will be no crazy weapon synergy in this video. Instead, what I will be sharing are my initial thoughts about the frame, how I mod Xaku, what's the purpose of each ability, and how to play the frame. So, without further ado, let's dive into this video. So the first thing you should know is that this new broken Warframe's blueprint can be acquired by completing the Heart of Deimos quest, and then, its parts can be acquired on Cambion Drift bounties, which you can see on Mother. The main concept of Xaku is a frame forged from remnants of lost Warframes, and based on experience. This frame's playstyle focuses on void damage. The core of Xaku is about harnessing the power of the void, and instigating it to the enemies, and each abilities of this frame can help you do that. Beginning with Xaku's first, Xakus Whisper. The ability is pretty simple. Once cast, your primary, secondary, and melee weapon will be granted with void damage bonus, and the ability to reset sentient damage resistance on all equipped weapons. The damage bonus of this ability is affected by ability strength, and putting lots of duration mods on it will make it last for over a minute. Mods like natural talent also affect its casting speed, and the energy cost is affected by ability efficiency as usual. Also, take note that the void damage bonus from this ability is multiplicative, and based on a percentage of the base damage of an equipped weapon, multiplied by various bonuses from mods like base damage, elemental, and faction-specific mods. However, this damage is separate from the combined physical and our elemental damage value on the equipped weapons. Also, it can let your weapons proc the void status effect, and how often it procs depends on the weapon's status chance. While the ability is perfectly good in paper, I honestly think that it's still missing some parts to make it good in real missions. Honestly, I find good use of this ability against sentient factions, not because of its additional damage, but because of its ability to reset the damage resistance of sentients. The void damage boost isn't enough in my opinion, and honestly, Xaku's second ability is better when it comes to killing sentients. However, it does good damage when you cast the Vast Runtime, since enemies will be 50% more vulnerable to void damage, making your weapons affected by your first ability do more damage to them. Another annoying thing about this ability is when you are shooting, it's hard to land headshots since there will be an orb floating around the enemy. And lastly, I think limiting this ability to just affect weapons makes it underwhelming. This could potentially give a boost to Xaku's other abilities, but then again, I think Digital Extremes are scared of giving this sort of power since we could mess up the game, especially if we consider the Helminth system. Nonetheless, I can say that Xakus Whisper is a great tool against sentient factions. Moving on, we got Grasp of Lock. The idea of this ability is like Loki's Disarm and Protea's Turret combined in one skill. When activated, this ability will disarm enemy weapons, and then Xaku will create void replicas of that weapon which deals void damage. The number of enemies affected will be determined by how much range you put on your build, while the void damage of the void replicas is affected by power strength mods. Also, how long the replicas are active depends on how much duration you put on your build, but it's kind of disappointing that you can't recast this ability at will. In my opinion, the disarm feature of this ability is great in terms of providing decent survivability to this frame, because like it or not, the evasion from both Xaku's passive ability and fourth ability aren't that reliable. Another downside of this ability being not recastable is that when you just affect one enemy, then you'll be stuck with only one void replica for the rest of the duration. That is why at its current state, I highly advise you to put lots of range on your build or use something that will group enemies, like the Megas Anomaly Arcane on your operator. On the damage side, Grasp of Lock is also lackluster at its own. Don't expect to see high damage numbers on your screen when you use this ability alone against other factions. This ability does need the defense reduction debuff from Gaze on your third ability to kill higher level enemies with lots of armors and shields. Although I'm hoping that Digital Extremes would consider letting Xaku's first ability affect the other abilities of this frame, and it would help out Grasp of Lock. I honestly think that the ability is fair when using correctly. Grasp of Lock does perform well if you can able to strip enemy defenses, and it works great against sentient faction. However, I'm hoping that Digital Extremes would somehow make this ability recastable. Next, we have the Lost. which is made up of 3 abilities. The first one is Accused, which is like Revenant's Enthrall ability that turns enemies into your allies. While it's good in terms of survivability, as it will take away some enemy aggro, but this ability does contradict with your second ability, as the moment you turn enemies into allies, your void replicas won't attack those targets. It's simply an awful interaction and a wasted potential. If somehow the replicas can attack those turned enemies, and then increase their damage or add other interactions, then this would make Accuse good as a utility. The next ability on his third is called Deny. Honestly, I don't see the point of this ability than Crowd Control, which costs a hefty amount of energy. The void damage is not that great even when used against sentient enemies. Although this ability can be amplified with enemy body parts abilities like Sonar, still, I did not use it quite often because of how slow the casting speed also. You see, this is not an issue from the Deny sub-ability only. In fact, all of Xaku's abilities are very slow in terms of casting speed. If there's one aspect that I will change with this frame, that is the casting speed of all abilities. It's annoying especially if you are using Xaku's third ability. Remember that the Lost has an ability wheel and you need to cast and hold to activate a specific sub-ability. It's quite annoying when you are going against Steel Path enemies since you don't have any room for long casting animation. Digital Extremes should consider making all casting animation of Xaku faster to make it usable in all scenarios. Before we proceed to the Xaku's ultimate ability, let's discuss first the last sub-ability, and probably the best in this frame's third. Gaze is the skill you would want to use often. The ability to reduce armor and shield will not only make your weapons hit harder, but also will make your Grasp of Lock deal good amount of void damage. Without armor and shields, your second ability can be a good source of damage, especially if you also affected enemies with your ultimate ability. There are 3 ways to properly use Gaze. One is on choke points, wherein you gaze 1 or 2 enemies to constantly strip all of the enemy's armor and shield within the radius. The second one is to group enemies with Magus Anomaly so you can both reduce their defenses, and as well as disarm and stole their weapons with your second ability. And lastly, you can stay on a gaze target radius, and then cast your second ability to make them use melee and come to you. It only takes a good strategy to make this ability great, and you should always activate this whenever you have the chance. And lastly, we got Xaku's ultimate named the Vast Runtime. In paper, the ability is pretty good, as when used, it will slow affected enemies, deal void damage to them, also inflicts 50% void damage vulnerability to affected enemies, gives you 75% dodge chance from incoming enemy projectiles, and will also give you a movement speed bonus. But in reality, the ability is very underwhelming. The only things that actually work are the void damage vulnerability and the increased movement speed. The dodge chance, which is the main source of Xaku's survivability, is unreliable. Honestly, it's better if they just made it as a damage reduction. Evasion is a mess when it comes to survivability, and there's no chance you can survive high-level missions with this feature. What's worse is that the ability does consume a lot of energy, not only on cast, but also while it's active. In my opinion, it's a bad move to make this a channeling ability since most of Xaku's abilities do require a lot of energy, and the fact is, you need almost all of this frame's abilities to survive and do good damage. Xaku is basically a caster frame in my opinion, and giving it a channeling ability was the worst decision that Digital Extremes have done. And to be honest, I was a bit confused about modding this frame because I was torn between survivability and making the frame do some good void damage. The thing is, if you want to give Xaku a bit of a chance to survive against high-level enemies, you need to put some efficiency mods and probably a lot of duration to somehow negate the drain of the Vast Runtime. But in the process, you will sacrifice range, which is crucial for both your second and third ability to work well. Also, you will need to have at least 200% power strength so that Gaze will have that 100% cap defense reduction. You could do that by putting umbral mods on your build plus transient fortitude, but then again, the range is just good enough to affect a couple of enemies. In most cases, you will be needed the help of crowd grouping abilities and arcane to make this mod setup work. Or, you can use this to just camp at choke points. It's kind of ironic since I did mean max it with duration to negate the energy drain of Xaku's fourth ability. But then again, dodge chance for survivability is not that reliable. I have used it a couple of times in different Steel Path missions, and from my experience, you can't survive when you are just using dodge chance alone. Probably you need to move around and cast your other abilities and combine it with the dodge chance of your fourth ability, and evasion on your passive ability. while the other build is all about max range and taking advantage of Xaku's third and fourth abilities. The only downside of this build is that it's heavily reliant on arcane energize, and you can only use this on missions wherein there are lots of enemy spawn. Probably missions on the Steel Path will be the perfect suit for this type of mod setup. Also, because this build has an insane energy drain on your fourth ability, you will only use it to provide void damage, vulnerability and crowd control while slowing enemies. I honestly think that Digital Extremes should cut off the energy consumption of Xaku, since this is one of the problems which makes Xaku underperforming. I get that the developer is hesitant to give Xaku more power since we got the Helminth system. Just take for example adding Empower on this frame. This could solve the power strength cap on Gaze and allows you to min-max your build. There are also those crowd grouping abilities that will improve the effectiveness of both second and third abilities. However, Warframes should be strong enough to hold their own and not rely on other sources. And to think that Xaku was a community-built Warframe, makes it even a priority to give it a better ability synergy. Don't get me wrong, this frame is good, but what I'm saying here is that this frame can potentially be better with a couple of tweaks. I'll wait up for tweaks before I will give a min-max build for this frame, but for now, I suggest that you put that former on hold. If Digital Extremes won't even touch this frame, then the best option I can give you is to have a min-max build which will require Helminth assistance. The bottom line is, I'll give you a better experience next time you'll see a broken Warframe video. For now, the frame is playable and good in Star Chart mission, and also in Sentient Tileset, but really in need of small pieces of tweaks to make Xaku better. Let me know in the comments section below about your first impression about this frame, and what are your thoughts after playing it for a while. Your constructive comments are appreciated and will be helpful for the community. Thank you so much for watching. Squad Leader signing off.
This is the future. Human error. Evolution. This is the future.